Hello AP World History students, Mr. Lassiter back with you for our time period 3 review from 600 to 1450 CE. In this video we're going to be looking at key concept 3.2, but just as a reminder, to help guide you through this, in the description down below I have linked the AP test review packets that should walk you through it. And if there's anything here that you want more information on, go to our favorite websites, AP Worldopedia or Freemanpedia. So key concept 3.2 is all about the continuity and innovation of state forms and their interactions. Basically, we're going to look at some state forms, empires that will continue from the previous time period, and we'll also see some new innovations develop to help improve upon what was learned from the empires of old. Empires collapsed at the end of our last time period. That's one of the reasons why we have a turning point here in history. And we see new state forms emerge in some regions. One example of this is the Byzantine Empire, which emerges out of the collapse or the split and collapse of the Roman Empire in our Mediterranean region. Another example of this is in China, with the fall of the Han Dynasty and the development of the Sui, Tang, and Song dynasties. These combine traditional power sources of power and legitimacy with innovations better suited to current circumstances. For example, some of these traditional sources of power and legitimacy came from things like patriarchy or perhaps religion. In the Byzantine Empire, they adopted Christianity, the reliance on land-owning elites. But they did make some innovations. For example, new methods of taxation, new tributary systems, especially in the Tang Dynasty of China, and adaptations of religious institutions. We also see new law codes develop, some borrowing from the past and some innovating. In some places, new forms of government or of governance emerge, including those developed in various Islamic states, the Mongol Khanates, in city-states, and even in decentralized government or feudalism that we see in Europe and Japan. So some of the examples of Islamic states that you need to know, of course, are the Caliphates, the Umayyad Caliphate, the Abbasid Caliphate, Muslim Iberia in Europe, and of course, in this time period, the Delhi Sultanate of India. Several city-states develop in this time period, the Italian city-states like Venice in the Mediterranean, the Swahili city-states of East Africa. We do have city-states develop in Southeast Asia and even in the Americas with the Mayan city-states in this time period. In some places, these states synthesized local and foreign traditions together. Some examples of this we can see with Persia. With the Islamic states, which borrow from Persia. For example, the practice of veiling women or having an absolute ruler. Those things are borrowed by these Islamic states, and it becomes common for for women to wear veils or the caliph to wield absolute power in the Islamic states. In Japan, we have another example of this borrowing from China. The Taika reforms are instituted to try to make Japan more like the Chinese government. These reforms do not ultimately, aren't totally successful, but we do see a centralized Confucian-based bureaucracy start to develop. We do see Chinese writing borrowed by the Japanese for their own writing system. Buddhism arrives in China and spreads, and even things like agricultural practices. The redistribution of land, the development of the equal field system is brought to Japan. In the Americas, as in Afro-Eurasia, state systems expanded in scope and reach. Networks of city-states flourish in the Mayan region, and we see imperial systems created with the Aztecs and the Inca in this time period as well, and that will of course play into our next time period. Now there are some really important empires and civilizations and states that you need to know in this time period. And so I've given you some space in your key concept review packet to take some notes. I'm going to go over really the key points with these empires, although there is a lot more that you can look at. And we'll start with the Byzantine Empire. Remember, the Byzantine Empire developed as the eastern half of the Roman Empire. As the western half of Rome was weakening, the cultural center, the trade centers shifted eastward to the city which would eventually become known as Constantinople. Justinian, in the late 6th century, rebuilds the empire, the Byzantine Empire, to basically Rome's old borders. He institutes a law code known as Justinian's Code, based on the old Roman law code. The emperor of the Byzantine Empire ruled as an absolute emperor, and even appointed the patriarch of the Christian church. And so basically what you had was a leader of both secular and religious aspects of the Byzantine Empire. We refer to this as Caesaro-Papism. Now, one of the rivals, of course, what became the main rival of the Byzantine Empire, were these Islamic states, the Islamic Caliphates, which included the Umayyad, the Abbasid, Muslim Iberia, which evolved from the Umayyad Caliphate, as well as the Delhi Sultanate in India. But in general, when we think about these caliphates, this is the Islamic Empire led by a caliph or successor to the Prophet Muhammad. They take on many Persian influences, and their growth is very swift. As you can see in this map, between 600 and 750, they move from just the Arabian Peninsula to stretching all the way from Europe to India. Islamic growth was a catalyst for the Crusades and the battles between Franks and other Europeans against Muslims in the Holy Land, which will lead to further cultural interactions and trade, especially as Italian city-states will trade more and more with the Middle East. Of course, it also led to a great deal of animosity. These Islamic caliphates are going to play a huge factor as they continue to expand eastward. They will come in contact with even the Tang Dynasty of China. Of course, the Islamic caliphates promoted trade, and we see merchant diasporic communities pop up all around the Indian Ocean region. Of course, Muhammad himself, being a merchant, is one of the reasons why Islam embraced this type of trade so wholly. In China, we see several dynasties in this time period. The three chief among them, the Sui, the Tang, and the Song. And we'll leave the Yuan dynasty for a moment. The Sui dynasty reunited China after several hundred years of decline or fragmentation after the decline of the Han dynasty. It is most noteworthy because the Sui dynasty begins the Grand Canal. Although it is short-lived, only around 30 to 40 years, the Sui dynasty had reunited China and basically sets the groundwork for the Tang dynasty in much of the same way that the Qin dynasty reunited China, setting the groundwork for the Han in our previous time period. The Sui dynasty was followed up by the Tang dynasty. This is the high point of Chinese civilization. The Silk Road becomes much more active as the Tang dynasty spreads into Central Asia, comes into contact with the Abbasid Caliphate at the Battle of Talas, but then trade flourishes between the two. The Tang dynasty exerts influence over Japan and Korea, spreads influence into Southeast Asia, develops printing. Although there are some issues with Buddhist influences. The Tang dynasty, also known for Empress Wu, the great female Chinese emperor. The Tang dynasty suppresses Buddhism for a time, which and re-encourages this Confucian thought in China. The Song dynasty kind of goes through two time periods, the Northern Song and Southern Song, we refer to it as. And the Song dynasty was a period of innovation, the development of paper money, gunpowder, other cultural achievements. They were eventually, of course, conquered by the Mongols. And here you see the map on the left, the Southern Song dynasty, as they were having to retreat inward as they faced external pressures on their borders. And you see their paper money that was associated with the Song dynasty. Of course, with the growth of the Mongols, Kublai Khan eventually conquers China, creating the Yuan Dynasty in China. Eventually, they are defeated, and the Ming Dynasty comes to power. The man you see there pictured is Zheng Ha, the great admiral of the Chinese Ming Dynasty fleets, who sails around the Indian Ocean seeking tribute before he is recalled by the Ming Dynasty, and they end their trade becoming more isolationist just at the wrong time as Europeans are about to come into the Indian Ocean. Of course, the Mongols, as I've said, are the granddaddy of all the empires in this time period. They, the Khanate of the Great Khan, of course, centered in what is Mongolia, spreads throughout this region. Genghis Khan creates a massive empire, and his successors create the largest land-based empire in the history of the world, stretching all the way across Asia. Of course, after the death of Genghis Khan, this large Mongol empire splits into primarily four successor states: the Khanate of the Golden Horde, the Ilkhanate of the Middle East, the Chagatai Khanate of Central Asia, and of course the Yuan Dynasty of China. But while these Mongol Khanates have united Asia, we have this period known as the Pax Mongolica, a time period where the Silk Road revives, where we see the trade of goods, animals, spices, silk, luxury items traded across these revived Silk Roads. Of course, with that also comes the spread of disease. In Europe, we see something a little different, right? As the Roman Empire had fallen apart and fragmented, we see that a feudal Europe develops, a decentralized continent with feudal lords. We see Charlemagne for a time unite parts of Europe in a Frankish empire, but eventually that breaks apart, and we see Europe in that kind of classic medieval feudal system based in manor life. In Italy, though, we see new trading powers, new city-states develop: Venice, Milan, Genoa, Venice, who are going to be very powerful merchant traders in the Mediterranean region. Japan is oftentimes compared to Europe in this time period. It mirrored Europe. It was a very decentralized area. Instead of lords, daimyo ruled over regions. Instead of knights, you had trained samurai, professional warriors. And Japan was broken into these kind of fragmented feudal kingdoms. You see this map a little after our time period, but gives you an idea of the fragmentation that was evident in Japan during this time. And of course, we can't leave out the Americas. Whether it was the city-states of the Mayans and the Yucatan, or the Mexican Empire in Mesoamerica of the Aztecs, or in the Andean region, the road-building, bridge-building Inca Empire. We see these flourish in this time period, especially toward the end of the time period. The Mayan Empire declines around the year 900, but the Aztecs and Inca will last until Europeans arrive and conquer them in the early 1500s. It's an important similarity or comparison between the Aztec and Inca are that their empires were built and ruled through military conquests. So that is something to think about. You also see pictured here Quipu, or the system of record keeping by the Inca. Remember that record keeping took many different forms, and Quipu are one example of how the Inca kept records in a non-traditional way that we tend to think about it. Human sacrifice was something that was common among all of these groups. The importance of religious traditions, building of temples, agricultural techniques thrived in this time period. In Mesoamerica, it was the Chinampa system, and the Andean civilization, Waru agriculture. Now, inter-regional contacts and conflicts between states and empires oftentimes encouraged technological and cultural transfers. And this included transfers between the Tang China and the Abbasids that followed the Battle of Talas. It also included transfers across Mongol empires as they conquered and pillaged their way across Asia. Transfers occurred during the Crusades as well. And of course, the Chinese maritime activity led by Ming Admiral Zheng He also led to these transfers. So let's start kind of in order. With Tang China and the Abbasids, we see the transfer of paper and gunpowder, some of the most important technologies from this time period. The Mongols revived Silk Road trade, spreading spices, goods, gunpowder, and yes, even diseases, especially the Black Plague. Of course, Crusaders coming back from fighting in the Middle East bring with them Arab and Indian math, ancient and classical Greek ideas. And Zheng He spreads Neo-Confucianism from China to Korea and Japan. He also brings back luxury goods and gifts, such as giraffes for the Ming Emperor. So that's the end of key concept 3.2, and what we see, hopefully, is that these empires continue to change, they continue to adapt from one another, they continue to interact, whether through trade or coming into conflict with one another in this time period. Again, a time period of regional and trans-regional interactions. So hopefully you got to see how that looked with our major states and empires from this time period. We'll continue with key concept 3.3 in our next video.